So this project really started for me when I was making my You Get Me series, and a lot of the conversations that I was having was with the young men and women were the fact that they felt like they didn't belong anywhere, that they were this kind of lost generation. And I always felt that way as well, because when I ended up going to school in Druids Heath, one of the things I was constantly told was like, who are you, where have you come from, why don't you go back to where you come from. So this idea of like motherland, my home, where do I really belong, is it England, is it Pakistan, is it where my parents came from, was always at the back of my mind. And about 3 years ago I had the opportunity to go out to Pakistan for the first time, and I've been thinking about it for 15 years, this idea that if I ever go back I would really like to make a body of work looking at the idea of homeland, material details like motherland, and what that really means to me, being incredibly British and being born in England. And so yeah, it started 3 years ago, and I was able to make a start, so it was a bit of research back then, and then I had another opportunity last year to go back out, and that was when I actually visited Kashmir, which is where my mum grew up, and my dad married my mother in Kashmir. So I ended up going back to where my mum's farmland was. I actually ended up meeting family for the first time that my parents essentially left behind, and had this kind of really romantic experience. I was under the kind of starlight skies, talking to my cousins, and they were talking about how my mother kind of used to run around the cornfields and play in the well, and it just made me think about her in a very different light, but also how very different my life could have been if my parents didn't get married and didn't come over to England to kind of build a better life. So this project is really trying to kind of celebrate that idea of a forgotten homeland, essentially. Yeah, so the Mangla Dam is like hugely significant for the British Pakistani community. It essentially displaced a lot of people. When India and Pakistan got separated, India controlled 6 of the main riverheads, 2 of which fed into Pakistan. So there was this water treaty conversation that needed to take place, and part of that conversation was to build this dam. And the dam was essentially in construction in 1947 and was released in 1967. And essentially what that did was displace over 100,000 people who lived around the dam. So Old Meerput, Old Dadial, those communities ended up spreading out to be moved, and it was about 280 towns and villages that were displaced. And one of the things that the community ended up doing, or the people who were displaced, they took part of that money that the government gave them to relocate to actually come to England. And that's why we have such a large British Pakistani Kashmiri community in the UK. And it was a really important story for me to tell, because that essentially was part of my family story, but very much part of the community in the West Midlands, up north. Those communities worked in the foundries. The Mangla Dam is the reason why they're here. And that particular project is still affecting people back home in Pakistan today. So there's an uprising project now, because as the sediment fills in the dam, essentially they need to fill it up more. So when I went out there, I started to see even kind of at that point, like new schools and towns being relocated again. So it's still quite a highly politically charged subject. And when I connected with residents here, which was part of my commission with Art Gallery a few years ago, there was people who were saying that they're already losing their family homes again. So it's a tough subject matter to talk about, but I want to celebrate the beauty of it as well, and that's why we thought we'd use this image as a key image. So when I returned back to my motherland as such, one of the things, when I ended up staying next to my mother's house and being with my cousins, they talked about this idea of how this home is incredibly modern. It's not the kind of home that my mum grew up in. So I really wanted to experience what that kind of house was, because as wealth and prosperity was brought into the community from the foundries, they sent a lot of money back home, so people started building these very modern houses. So I ended up going quite close to the border of India with my cousin on a motorbike. It took a few hours from where my mum grew up, and we found these incredible mud houses. And I really wanted to get to know the material qualities of these houses. So my mother would talk about how in the summer they would be incredibly cool, but in the winter they'd be very well insulated. And it took quite a while to find these houses because they're quite rare now. But I remember walking, getting off the motorcycle, and I saw this one house just kind of up on the hilltop, and walked in, and my cousins helped me, talk to them, and it just ended up being this family that had been living there for about 70 years, and they had like 6 of these amazing houses up on the hillside, and they own this incredible forest. So it was really great to spend time looking at the material details, the thickness of the walls, how the interiors looked. I made a lot of research work about that, and was welcomed into the bedrooms, and so one of the things I really wanted to do was bring back that idea of these mud houses into a gallery setting and build an installation piece. And it was really to celebrate how far the community's come, but also like celebrate how wonderful these structures are. And when I was growing up, there was a lot of through the racist taunts that I had, being told to go back home, also kind of being made to feel like an inferior, and this othering that's been happening over the last 20 years. I wanted to somehow have the not in my generation but the younger generation be incredibly proud of their heritage, because I think it's really important that they understand that where their grandparents came from, their parents came from, and celebrate the fact that how amazing their lives are now, but actually how incredible they were back then for their families, and the sacrifice that they made for their kids or their grandkids to have a better life in England, really. So it's really about trying to tarnish that shame of coming from very humble beginnings. I did a structure a couple of years ago at Icon Gallery, and the general feedback was, how beautiful these mud houses were, and how romantic they were. So we're very lucky to be able to do it again on a grander scale for a longer period of time. So we're not only going to clay the walls, we're going to decorate them quite detailed inside with the community here, and we're going to spend a few months doing that. So it's going to be a really exciting piece that we can share in the family gallery and talk about, what does home mean to all of us, really.